Hi, I'm Eliza Cranston, and I'll be presenting about Althea Gibson, the professional tennis player from the 1950s. So, my research question is, how did the success of Althea Gibson have different meanings because of her race in the 1950s, and how was this success gained through feeding into racist and classist systems? So, Althea's background is she was born in 1927. She was born in South Carolina, but her family moved to Harlem, New York because of the Depression, and her father could find work there. She started playing tennis under the guidance of the New York Police Athletic League, which was a league for athletes of color at the time. She attended Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. And what's really important to note about her background is she comes from a working class background because that will play a huge part in the complexity of her success later on. So her achievements: 1942 was her first win, but it was a win in the American Tennis Association, which was an organization founded by and for African American players. But by 1950, she was the first black tennis player in the National Grass Court Championship tournament. So this is a tournament for mostly white folks at the time, and she was the first athlete of color to be kind of invited to that, and she was the first black player to be invited to Wimbledon also. She was the first black player to win singles in the French, Wimbledon, and US Open throughout her career. And also interesting is that in 1964, she became a professional golfer and was the first woman to hold an LPGA player's card. So what's interesting to look at is her intersectionality of gender and sports, as she was a successful female athlete before the integration of Title IX, which was in 1975, and she was an athlete in the 50s. So she's a really impressive role model to look at the success of a woman athlete of this time, and she was very famous and well respected. And she was also a woman of color, which is really impressive and a huge symbol of success also. Um, at this time, usually women were not really represented in the media at all. It's this quote says, "Women athletes were ignored completely or underrepresented in sports magazines," um, and that was from the Female Athletes and Media Strides Stalemates article that we have. Um, but what's really impressive is that she was actually written about in Sports Illustrated on July 2nd, 1956, during a big peak in her career. So she was actually recognized by the media. However, her achievements of a woman were actually usually overlooked because of her racial identity and her success as a woman of color at this time. And it was written ignoring the obstacles Gibson faced as a woman's tennis champion in American society and exposing hidden class prejudice. So that's basically what the media, especially the black media and the African American media at the time, really focused more on her success um, as a person of color and less about her success as a woman. Her race and tennis. So tennis is a white dominated sport. It was then and it continues to be today. She started at the American Tennis Association because, like I mentioned, it was an African American sponsored association, and eventually she would actually be allowed in the United States Lawn Tennis Association, which at first did not allow African American membership, but she eventually got in. And this next quote talks about how she was looked at as the Jackie Robinson of tennis world, in terms of her racial strides and kind of fighting for civil rights at the time. She was constantly supported by the African American community, who was rooting for her success. It was seen as a community project. This quote from Ted Poston wrote, "Here indeed was the culmination of a dream, the climax of a nationwide community project." She specifically was supported by the upper class black elites, the American Tennis Association, and the black press. What's an important thing to think about here is the idea of heroic minority. She had exceptional talent, and that's why she was kind of respected by the communities, both communities of color and the white communities specifically, and that's why she was seen and respected, unlike many African Americans at the time, which were not respected at all just because they didn't have this exceptional talent. So what's really important to look at here is also her class. It was a huge part of her story. Like I said, she was financially supported by the black elites, And the way that this kind of is important is because they only saw that she could be successful if she was supported by upper class and if she fit into kind of the white expectation of a tennis player. That they believe she had to be kind of groomed to be an upper class elite, and that's how she would fit in. She was um, transforming a rough on headstrong Harlem woman into someone who would be accepted by the tennis elite. So that's really important to think about, and that kind of goes into the ideas about politics of respectability that we talked about. If Gibson acted better and she acted respectable, then she would be treated better and treated well amongst the white community, and that's something really important to look at. It's also important Eurocentric life goals. She was kind of defined by having to be included and accepted by the elite, and that's the only way she could be successful in her tennis career. Those were valued, and her working class background was looked down upon and was trying to be hidden by the black elites to make her fit in better. And there's often disagreement about this in the black community. Um, it's also important to note that the grooming was a prime example of forcing her to act white and assimilation at the time in the 1950s, because the only way they believed she could be successful is if she acted white and was included in the white community. But she had a lot of pressure on her because she was supposed to be this huge role model for the black community and a civil rights activist. Again, something that often overlooked her as successes as a woman. This quote says, her Wimbledon victory made her a valuable commodity, and the black press tried to insist that she accept the condition of a race hero and civil rights activist. So she was always unapologetically herself, including her race, but some in her community um, believed that she had to act white to be successful. It's also important to note is her success in golf, because not only was she an influential player in the tennis world, but she was actually integrated into the white culture of golf. And after she retired from tennis, she became a golf player, and she was the first black woman to hold an LPGA player's card. So not only did she infiltrate white sport of tennis, but also golf. This also another upper class elite sport. And she's a really powerful, inspiring person. This quote says, yet throughout her career, she negotiated what it meant to be Althea Gibson to both the white tennis establishment, who finally let her in, and the African Americans struggling to secure civil rights. So she was a huge, influential person during this time, especially during the 50s and the 60s during rights. She made a huge impact, and she was a really inspirational woman to look up to. And she paved the way for others like Sloane Stephens, Serena, and Venus Williams, who are obviously professional tennis and really successful tennis players of today, and not only professional women, but women of color. So that's she's a really inspirational person. Here are my sources. Thank you.